Hello and welcome to a new session of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Glamorous World. And today I'm joined here by Sean DeNigris. Hi, Sean.
Hi, Tudor.
So, Sean, you've been on this Glamorous Toolkit journey almost since the beginning, as a faithful user and critic. And so I'm quite excited to be talking to you with you today. So I'm interested. What do you think about the journey so far?
Wow, it's a big question. I would say that it has been, well, first I'll say that for beta software, it's been remarkably stable. I mean, there are hiccups and annoyances, but it just works 95% of the time or better. So that's good. And I would say that it's the first, I'm willing to put up with a lot because it's the first system that is out of my way enough and supportive enough and expressive enough for me to actually get to work on some ideas that I've had for decades that just got too stymied. Even in a system as helpful and expressive as Smalltalk, it wasn't quite enough to give me a foundation to explore some of these ideas, which I'm now just at work on. So overall exciting, and just eager to see every, this constant work being done, and it keeps improving. And I'm just, eager to see what's next, of course.
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I remember, quite at the beginning, there were a few times where I was really surprised as to why would anyone put up with with that version. Because I mean, if you knew what you were doing and you knew where the landmines are, then you kind of could find your way around. But but then seeing others trying to do the same, but without prior warnings, it was quite something. And yeah, so thank you very much for all that patience. So let's do this session. Typically, when we have the Hitchhiker's Guide, we people just start with questions, and maybe I show something around. But maybe we can do it the other way around now. Maybe if you can maybe have questions, or but we can do it on your machine this time, if you want.
Okay. Sure.
I can also show it on my machine.
All right, let's see. I just did a little demo at the UK user group. So I actually have a little page that might be helpful to start with. Let me see how to share my screen here. Which window is it? It is, I think, that one. Let's try that. All right, do you see something that says Dynabook demo?
I do.
Okay, all right. So this is, I really got hooked onto Smalltalk when I saw Alan Kay's TED Talk, and I started to look and research him quite heavily. And when I was floored by the idea of the Dynabook, this idea that the computer would be a tool or a tool bench that helps unleash one's creative spirit and support one in life and enables one to model and simulate and all this stuff. And it seemed like the best answer I had heard of so far for this sort of amorphous dream that I was chasing, from C to C++ and all the frustrations and complexity. I started going more and more down the dynamic rabbit hole to Ruby, and when I found this, it just seemed like a whole new world had opened. And then I started getting into Engelbart and the NLS and all that stuff. So that's kind of the world that I live in. I'm a reluctant programmer. but I do it because that's the outcome that I'm looking at. That's sort of an outcome. And so, usually when we talk about the Dynabook, we talk about creating something that would enable other users, like kind of what you're doing, like creating a G toolkit, or creating Squeak, or creating Frank with the VPRI guys. So what I've been interested in is, if there was ever a thing that actually was released and usable, what would the average user do with it? So I'm not like so much into like creating the next system that everybody's going to use. You're doing that and you're doing a great job. I'm interested in like, if everybody was really using this thing to support their life, what would that look like? So I've modeled a bunch of domains that are kind of key domains that I deal with in my life. So, one of the things is just kind of a simple address book. And so here we have an example address book. So we'll dig into that a little bit. And we have these views. So this is all, I stole, this basic stuff shamelessly from G Toolkit. I just copy pasted the demo address book in the system, but I extended it quite a bit for my needs. So in this address book, if you know anything about Harry Potter, these are a few kind of key, this is a person in Harry Potter. These are a couple of places in Harry Potter. And so this particular concept.
I think your screen has maybe, because I'm still just seeing Dynabook demo window.
Yeah, okay, hold on. How about now? Better?
That's much better.
Okay, so we have a person in Harry Potter and a couple of organizations, and you can tell by the icon that, the difference. And you can add, so, with Spotter, you have these spotters on everything now. So this is, and we should say, right, this is just for people that may not know. What I'm dealing with is not some custom GUI tool that I wrote. It's just an inspector in GT that I extended, and that between the extensions that were already in the address book and some things that I added. So we can search by organization, by person, and we can actually create a person. And so now what's interesting is that this is actually parsing the name. And so inside the name parser, it's that people should have at least 2 names. So it's not going to offer you the ability to create a person until you start to have 2 names. And then it goes, right now it thinks it might be an organization. And then if you, oh, look, there's 2 names. So now that's a person. So we can add a person there. And, so that's, kind of interesting, maybe not, but then now we're going to go to look at a slightly related example. So this next thing is financial software. And we're going to keep the theme of Harry Potter, just to have a consistent metaphor. And so this is an inspector on a journal. So this is for, if you know anything about accounting, this is the standard accounting, very boring accounting journal that you would see. So we have transactions here. And then for each of these transactions, actually these lines are splits, or, there's a few different names for it, but you have your debits and your credits. Now, what's interesting about this in my mind is that the transaction here has a counterparty. Now, what separates this from every other accounting system on the planet is that, and it is really only possible in a small talk like system like G Toolkit, is that the counterparty is the organization from your address book. So in every other accounting software, it'd either be a string, or you'd have to duplicate every person and organization you deal with once in your address book application and once in your accounting application. So when I looked this up in the accounting application, it would be a dumb object that probably didn't have all the information. And if I wanted to call them, the phone number would be in my address book, and I'd have to go there. But then this is, the full object. So it has, it has the address here, and if I knew the website and the phone numbers, it would already be in there. So it's, what you have here are 2 domains that just about everybody needs, that have been broken out of the prison of their stovepipes. So objects can live freely in the address book, in the accounting system, and they operate together. So any thoughts so far? Or should I just keep going?
Yeah, that's nice. So one of the things I see here, so first of all, it's interesting how you're thinking, because that's exactly how we are building things as well. So here you're in a world where you have a domain model, or you have a domain and you want to model it in some way and be able to quickly explore it. In most of our use cases, when we, this is not necessarily the interface, but it's just enough so that you can just to explain what the model is. Well, here your intent, you bring it a little step further, say, well, I actually want to use this interface for my needs, and it's totally fine if it's raw, as long as it connects the thing, right? Because it's interesting how we, right, how much we invested in the polishing of how things look, and not so much in the semantics of what of how things work, right? And while here it's kind of like it's reversed, right? It's very interesting to see it used for specific, interest, like personal interest, and so that's quite neat. One of the things I see here is that you're going to this general journal, and the general journal has a view general journal, and I think what you would want is to have that journal view also in VS Books, which is a simple
Yeah.
thing. It's very small, but basically, one of the things I noticed is that I have I developed an immediate an immediate reaction every time I see raw. Every time I see the raw view.
Yeah.
Because then there's like a reflex. So it used to be a time when the first thing I would say is, oh, great to have an inspector. You have these because you can see the variables, you can interact with the object. And then it took a while to start creating these custom views and started accommodating those. And then we realized, well, actually, every time I go to raw, it's probably an indication that I'm missing something else. So it's like but it took a while for us to understand but now having lived so long in this kind of world, now I feel it like this. And it's interesting, every time we go outside and you talk with somebody else and then they give us a demo and they just show either code or a raw view of an object, it just feels really like it feels uncomfortable. We haven't necessarily found maybe all the, so for example, here, if you have just one view, then it's kind of easy. Like here you have general journal in your journal object. So we can just take that view and you can create the forward view in VS Books that will just take that view and put it there on the left-hand side. But sometimes you have 2 or 3 or 4 views.
Yeah.
And we didn't really necessarily found a nice solution for that. Like forwarding the view there one by one is one solution, but I suspect that we'll want to extend that one a bit more. But still, I would still do that. I would take this view and put it there because it was the first thing you wanted to do. And
so let's do it. So, it's interesting. Let's do it for fun because it'll take 1 minute. So what's interesting is that every time I click through here, I feel the same pain.
yeah.
I feel pain most of the time that I'm programming. And so I have to be selective about which pain I give into just because of limited time.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
I'll just comment that out for a minute. All right. So let's see.
Okay, so now you're trying to say, I'm going to duplicate that view from there to here, right?
Right. Objects. I don't know. I'm actually
I see. So you're not.
I'm going to do the naive version because I don't know if it could be nil, but we'll just do this. I don't think I need that.
You need you need view, I think. Right.
And I think it should be the same name.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see, and we can get rid of that. And that probably should do something reasonable.
That's it. Woohoo.
That was
yeah. Right. So that's nice, right?
Yeah, it is nice. And so actually, I remember asking, how do you get all the views of the general journal under this tab?
Right.
And you said that, it's not a great UX. And I did it anyway. And for a long time I would just do that. I would duplicate them in there, but the confusion becomes that you forget which object you're actually working with, because then what'll happen was when I was dealing with like all the tabs, what I would routinely do is pull up an inspector and start thinking that I was inspecting the thing that the second row of tabs. So I would like try to work with the general journal, but of course I'm still in the books. So I
Right,
stopped doing that. I just picked the most interesting
so
tab.
can you alt click on it? Can you just alt click on the view?
Yeah.
So this one gives you a right. It's it gives you an idea of the that or just generally where you are, and so. But it's interesting that you only see one method definition. Okay. Right. So this is how like the way I look at things is sometimes I don't know. So what's in there. So I quickly just do an alt click just so that I can see what's the receiver. Okay. So here it's easy, it's forward. So that's easy, but and then you can immediately see the object. So you would go there. But sometimes you don't necessarily see, because sometimes the transformation happens. Sometimes the transformation happens right in the view, like you were having before, and there it does some, maybe the initial block or the input to the view is maybe more complicated, and every time I want to interpret a view, right, I take its source, because that's the legend basically, right? So you're seeing some sort of a map on, and then you need to first now understand what the notation is and what the semantics of what you're seeing is, and then afterwards you start to use it. So that's the like a pattern, and then this one ends up simplifying how you're interacting, because so here these are objects that you know rather intimately because you built those. But then there are other situations where you want to use the views to actually discover a system.
Right.
And so then this this is where it becomes even more like, there the default is that you are confused because you don't know. So the view is just a way to get you in, but it's not it's not the final answer. You still have to go in and understand, and then come back and then try and then do. So this dance is, I think, always going to be there, right? That's why we kind of designed, or the interaction patterns that emerged are modeled around that part, just so that we can. It's always like a bit of skirmishing, and you go in there just scouting a bit, and you come back and you consolidate, and you go a little bit more, and you learn something, and you come back and you consolidate some more, and you just go like this. And we basically do it all the time. And so this is why much of this, right, much of the interactions are kind of optimized for that behavior, which is what we are using, but might not be necessarily the most obvious kind of way to use the environmental.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it is already very usable. And it was interesting when you were saying that, I'm using the kind of the developer tools as a GUI. That was what I heard you saying.
Yeah.
And the thing about that is that when I have tried to model these domains before, I had a vision in my head for the ultimate GUI, right? Which was not possible with a standard GUI library. So then I'd have to go into Morphic, which lets you do absolutely anything you want. But having zero structure, I would just go down all these rabbit holes, and I would spend all my energy focusing on this amazing GUI that the model would never become rich enough. And then, as the model changes, the GUI changes. So I would basically create this gigantic technical debt of this awesome GUI that then had to be carried around with me as the model evolved. So what this actually lets me do is it gives me just enough structure and just enough power to not be miserable to work with the system as the model evolves without having any technical debt, because I can slap on the GUI when it gets stable enough if I so desire.
Right. So I kind of, that's kind of, it's nice. And we definitely, I mean, this is also how, like, all the GUI that we build, this is how this is how they grow. So the very first thing, we're always just going to create the simplest thing, maybe a view, which would be in this case, right? This is already a complicated view. It has, like number of columns, which they have semantics there. First, I bet you just had 3 or 4 of them. And then you added some more and then some more. And then it grows like that, right? And then at some point we'll see, well, now I have it, I'm clicking too much. So now I probably want to have a dedicated interaction. So that's why we introduced this notion of a tool, right? So sometimes if you scroll here to the left on the Lepiter page, you see there on the top, the inspector, right? This is a composite tool. And so the Lepiter page is, in this case, is it's a tool, right? But then you can go here and then you toggle the tool.
Yeah.
So the object is basically going to stay the same, but now here you toggle the tool. So it's kind of you have two levels of basically of packaging that we have. So we have the inspector, which is the default tool. And in the inspector, you have these views. But sometimes you're going to say, yeah, not everything is, I don't want to see the header. I just want to focus on that's one thing, for example, or so. And then we can build another tool on top of it. But it always starts from the inspector, right? So for example, the Git interface that we recently enhanced. For the longest time, we just had a bunch of views in some inspector objects, and this was a Git interface, which was okay enough for us to, to cross the bridge. Was not necessarily the bridge that we wanted, where all the cars and trucks can go through, but it was good enough to just cross the water, if you tread it carefully. So the process is exactly this one. What is also exciting here is that when this whole thing with Glamorous Toolkit started from the technical problem. How do I reason about systems? And seeing it now used towards personal computing, basically, it's kind of exciting because you get to see that indeed the same principles apply. And it's really strange, right? It's strange that we took such a detour, because these ideas were known for decades ago. But we just took a very awkward, detour, and we live in this world of tiny, shiny tools that have no idea of how to communicate with one another, and which is, then you fragment your abilities to reason about anything around you, because of the boundary of the tool. So anyway, seeing we didn't necessarily set up to, we thought, well, at least we should solve the software explainability problem. But this is so fascinating, how that principle, all the principles that we think are important for making software explainable, also lend themselves to becoming to be the pillars for building something that maybe is useful for personal computing or for knowledge management, for that matter. And that's that was one of the unexpected, let's say, facts that we stumbled across.
Well, I mean, I'm particularly enamored with using the inspectors, because it to me, it's such a direct example of what Alan Kay talks about preserving the full power of the computer at every level. Because I mean, what obviously but somebody watching might not know, is that in this inspector, I can actually go into this coder And for messages that don't need arguments, I can execute these things right in place. And then if it's too complicated for that, I pull up the inspector and then I can add arguments to these things. So, I mean, it's like you're never trapped in like a GUI screen where the thing that you want is somewhere else and you don't know how to connect it with the thing that you have. That's like, it's not an experience that exists in GT.
Right. Okay, so let's move on. So we have these VS
Right.
books, and now we have the library.
You know, I feel compelled and I have to add one thing to this view here, which is, so what I started doing was, this was something that the Lepeter page does. Instead of doing the two-tiered tabs, what I started doing was just adding a button to inspect the object that's being viewed. So that if you need to get in there, you can. And I don't think I need it.
So here you want a self general journal.
Yeah.
It's one object.
Inspect journal and then self. Yep. Self general should work. Okay. And then there's the button and
yeah, nice.
I can move on. I can move on with my life. So another example of is this. So this one's called a living library, and so it's like Calibra, you know, the ebook management software, except it could manage ebooks, physical books, that kind of thing. So we have a. By the way, is the font readable, or should I bump the scale a little bit? Okay. So we have Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. We have a Star Wars trilogy, and then we have this, what we're going to focus on for the moment, which is this YouTube video that Brett Victor did called Stop Drawing Dead Fish. So when you have an authored work in this particular system, you can have different copies of it. So, you know, I've debated for a long time for a YouTube video whether you really need a copy in a work. But, you know, what I ultimately realized is that there are subtle distinctions in models that really matter, but not every example shows why they matter. And I realized to myself, you know, he gave this talk, and so I care about this talk. That's like kind of the abstract concept that I care about. And yes, it is on YouTube, but I could have been at the conference where he gave the talk, and they may have given USB sticks of the recording of the talk, and then I'd have two copies. So ultimately, I realized that yes, every work needs to have multiple copies, even if it seems kind of obvious that the work is the copy in a certain kind of straightforward case. So now I'm going to go into my actual, instead of going through this example, I'm going to go through my actual library and find Stop Drawing Dead Fish. And so this one, I have a transcript. So I took some notes, and I think I'm sharing just this window. So I'm going to stop for a second so I can share the whole screen, which is desktop 2. Okay, let's see here. Because there's going to be another, all right. So now do you see GT on the left? Right. All right. So in this system with the transcript, it actually knows that there's a copy that's a YouTube video and generally how to play it. So actually, I'm gonna shut all of this down because I have a million windows open. Just go back into Safari. Okay. And then, okay, grab that. All right. So when we, of course, now it's not gonna work. I'm gonna shut it down. Aha. The joys of demos. All right, hold on a second here. Let me go back and grab it. Try it again. There we go. So in this particular case, I'm on a Mac, so I'm using the driver here to show this is using AppleScript to drive Safari. I also implemented a driver that uses Microsoft Playwright library, which is like a Selenium type of thing that you can programmatically drive browsers. But so it's good to have different options. In this case, you know, with YouTube, I want to be signed in generally. So it's difficult to do with Playwright because it's kind of like it gives you like a generic browser. But Playwright is nice because I've actually run into cases where I needed to talk to an element in a form, and that is extremely difficult to do via JavaScript due to security concerns. So in times when you don't care about security, you have Playwright as an option. So I have a couple of.
We might want to take a look at the Chrome integration.
I did. Sorry, go ahead.
because we just we just did a little we just played a bit with exactly these kinds of problems that you were saying. So going past the, like, for example, if you want to authenticate, how do you do that? And waiting for some notification. And so you sometimes want to do some interaction in the browser, some interaction in the script. And how do you get to, how do you control the chat from your program?
Mhm.
So,
I will definitely take another look. I was struggling with the Faro Chrome stuff, and I went on the Google Dev Protocol docs, and then basically the first thing was, you probably don't want to use this, use Playwright. So for me,
yeah.
just because, and now I have Firefox and Safari, because some pages just don't, you may need a certain browser. So anyway, a bit of a tangent, but I have two quotes that I picked out that were important to me. And so if I click on the position of the quote there, it will sync the video to just when he was saying.
What does this art medium provide that no medium in the past has ever provided?
And then if we go to, let's say, 17 minutes here, and there was another quote, and I start typing the quote, it will give me a timestamp for that position in the video. So this is now this is interesting, and there's not many systems you can do this, but there are systems you can do something like this. But again, just because we're in a small talk like system, what you can't do in any of those systems is click on Brett Victor's name and now you're in his contact in your address book. So if I wanted to tweet him a question about this thing, I can go, and I had his Twitter handle already in my address book, or if I knew him and wanted to send him an email, it's right here. And that, it's hard to, you do a click and say a sentence, but this is like reversing 50 years of dystopian corporate
yes, it's pretty cool. Yeah.
To a time when normal people could actually do incredibly powerful things with computers as a rule. So I don't know how much more how to drive the point, but that step is quite revolutionary.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating how you've built this. I mean, you look at this UI and say, whoa, right? It's totally not impressive.
No, not at all.
But when it does what you really want, there's this, we were so trained in a certain way to evaluate the value of something by some parameters. For example, how does it look like, right? Does it have, is the font right? Is the color, are the colors nice? Or, UX, those are important. They're important, right? When everything else is equal, those are important. But
yes,
we are not really, at the same time, we kind of fine with just clicking 3-4 times and having to keep something in our brain when going somewhere else to find this, right? So for example, just this one, going from the name to going from this video to somebody and maybe to tweet them something. It would, right? Normally, going from this to that, it would say, oh, Brett Victor. So I would copy that, go to my address book and paste it there. So in the meantime, I would have to have that thing in some buffer, right? Usually in my brain, my memory, and then switch to something else, visually see something else, and then remember that one, take that one from there and put it, and then bridge those two tools with that little manual in between. And sometimes the integration does exist, but when it does exist, it's like a magical / miracle something. It's just like, wow, it worked, but you don't know, right? It's unexpected, and it's a little bit unsettling. You're kind of happy that you don't have to do it, but it's not something you can feel in control of. And it's so, like, I can see when the reason I'm getting excited when I look at this is because one of the hardest thing we have to explain this idea of moldable development and what the moldable environment is, and for example, how it is different from malleable systems. What that idea of malleability is, that it's not enough to be able to just extend where the tool wants you to extend. It's the ability to answer any question using the same ability that you learn once and then use many, many, many times over, and you're not afraid of a new question. That's the thing. And this is so, and then the beauty of that one, it doesn't come from how beautiful the tool is, although again, that one is interesting, just how things look, but it comes from how well that thing that you're seeing matches your specific mental model right at that moment. And if you're the only one that has that mental model, and you're the only one for which the tool works, that is still super valuable. And there's this beauty that is basically you can appreciate it. Like only the person that has that mental model can appreciate it, and that's absolutely fine. So what I'm certain of is that I will probably not feel exactly the same as excited about this thing as you are, because I'm not using it on a daily basis, or and I'm at the same time, I'm very much convinced that you feel excitement. Even if, for example, like, you know, like for me, the play button, the first play button is not aligned with the rest of the text. So that immediately draws my, or like it rings a bell in my brain, but I don't have to be the one that judges that. And that's the thing, right? Because we've kind of got used to this idea that beauty is generic, beauty is general, like everybody has to share beauty, which is fine in some way, but there's this all the other idea got lost in the process, that personal computing was always supposed to be personal. And the question is, you know, how do you navigate that? And so that's why, you know, seeing this is super exciting. And this little example here, this is when I saw it first time, when I saw the demo, it got me so, I got goosebumps.
I still get goosebumps when I give it, because this dream has been in my head for so long.
And it's so cool, right? And yeah. So one of the things, for example, here is that when you see Brett Victor, I would make that one a little button, maybe with a gray background. So when you click on the whole line, you get this one, but you can also click on just on Brett Victor to get to the object on the right-hand side. I would do that.
So you're saying make it more obvious that you can click on Brett Victor, that it's a button?
Right, exactly. So make that one a little like a tag button, and then this would communicate even more. That is like this, and maybe also the buttons for searching and for time, they make the rest of the text jump, right? So the text jumps. You can try to add them at the top or at the bottom, and always leave a little bit of space. So we had the same problem in Lepiter, in the snippets. And so the question was, what do we do with the buttons for running a snippet? How do they make them? Because we wanted to have the UI make it appear, but we also didn't want the rest of the UI to flip back and forth as you move your mouse.
Yes.
Through the text.
And the problem, I did originally have the toolbars at the bottom, but the problem is, as you're scrolling, it makes it very hard to select individual snippets, because the boundary between the snippets jump all over the place when they're at the top or the bottom, and it disappears. See, because what I wouldn't want there to be a lot of white space, because it messes with the outline. You know, you can see a lot. So I might leave them there and just make them like the way Lepiter tools are. Like it doesn't actually relay out it. It just it's like a blank space there, you know.
Yeah, that's also possible.
And of course, you know, there's it's not super featured, but
tell the audience
you can speed it up and
so they can enjoy
slow it down and stop. You know, you have the full HTML5 video API available. It's just what I mapped buttons for, what I needed, you know, at the moment. So you can close it up there. And this actually, I was actually glad that I looked at the Playwright API, because when I implemented the AppleScript stuff, Playwright does this really cool thing where it deals in locators, what they call locators. And it's much like file locators in Faro's file system, where you just kind of give it a way to find something, but you don't have the actual thing. You have a thing that lets you find a thing. So it's all this is very lazy. So what it enables me to do now is that it actually doesn't, in AppleScript, it's hard to get the way I'm using it because it's horrendously complicated to do right. It's hard to get an actual element. So it doesn't hold on to the page or the browser or the window. It just holds on to a kind of a wildcard selector that can find the page so that when it needs it, it can. And I got that out of Playwright. So it was interesting to implement a few different backends for it.
Very nice.
So, all right. So now this one is next thing is, so this is fit data. So when you work out, they have this thing called it's a binary data format that Garmin puts out. And it tracks things about your workout. So if you're on a bike, the bike feeds the data to the app. If you have a heart rate monitor, you can add that kind of stuff. So what we're looking at here on the right is this is a file locator, but one of the libraries I have is this thing called Resources Live, I think it's called. So the tab here that we're looking at is actually, you got the file locator in the inspector, but this thing, it knows that it's a fit data. So it's actually giving you a fit data object that actually has more domain specific things, because we really don't care, ultimately we don't care about files. Caring about files is like caring about the carburetor in your car when you're going to the store. Somebody cares about the carburetor, but it's really not that, it just has to work when you're going to the store. So we're presenting a view that actually this particular file type, these are the things you can do with it.
That's fine. So you're using Coder here.
Yeah, yes.
As a set of
I knew you'd get a kick
shortcuts.
out of this. Yes, because it was just so perfect, because for this particular item, all the things that you care about are unary messages. So it was just so perfect. So now that converted it to a CSV file and parsed it, and now we have our actual object, and you could do you can chart things. So this was I was on a bike on this particular workout, and this is how the RPMs that you're in the pedal.
Right, but
So,
now I mean we have to bring this one into a view right on the left hand side.
Yes.
Like you have to, like, this is just.
I don't know. I mean, this was, it's, when I do these things, I'm scratching an itch. And I scratch it enough that I ignore it for a while I go scratch another itch, So the interesting thing about this, this is not a particularly beautiful chart, but go out in the world and try and get a chart like this. You're either going to have to subscribe to some sort of online service or buy an app. There's no way to get charts like this. And there's certainly no way to take that same data and put it into the data frame, put it into the data frame, library, and get all kinds of statistical information about. Now, you might not care about that for cadence per se, but and again, it isn't a workout charting app. It's an application of an anything charting app, right?
Yeah.
It's a little connection to GT which can chart things. So and then they have like your I
like the total calories thing.
Yeah, that's not a real thing. That's thing that when any app or bike or whatever, they always give you that so you feel like you're doing something. But it's you need to know a lot about the person, and I could probably do something more accurate, but you'd have to do the person's age and weight and all that kind of stuff. So.
And that's the thing. So one of the things that this is lovely in such a nice way, because so one of the things that we're still struggling with explaining is that tools, like most people look at tools and they say, well, this tool has features, and we are just trying to say, don't think in terms of features, think in terms of operators that you can combine in many ways. right? And that's exactly here, right? That's exactly what we're seeing here is
It's like the IDE is language thing that you always talk about, operators.
exactly, but it's still hard to explain. It's still hard to explain what that means and how does it,
Sorry, my
because
daughter
every
was
time you
delivering.
say
I'm back.
which is great. Which is, so it's still hard to explain what does it mean to the environment is the language and not made of features, right? So here we're seeing how, like, when you're combining, it kind of becomes obvious that, oh, it's programmable. So, but like this is what we had before, right? But this, you had a programmable interface, and because you had this programmability, you could interact with your external thing, with your video, and then you could have it in there and you create your data interactively like this. But here, it's the program that is the interface, and that's the interesting thing, right? So because here you just literally used a code browser as the way to, you know, get to the thing that you wanted to get to. Is this what I would have, you know, done? No, but it's still super interesting. It's still super interesting how you have operators, and then, because like just, you know, scrolling one to the left here, just one pane to the second pane in the flow, right? That one there. It's so, I mean, I never thought of that, of using Coder as a way to to build shortcuts, basically. It's kind of obvious, right? In hindsight, it is obvious, but I haven't thought of it. And it's so just interesting. I would not use it like this, but it's still okay because I don't have to use it like this. And that's the interesting thing, right? Because when you're building a programming language, you're not going to write all the programs that people will write with that programming language. And the same thing would happen with when the environment becomes a language, you will not construct all the concrete instances, all the concrete experience that people will have with that environment. And you don't have to. And that's okay. And that's the interesting thing. So the fact that you can take, right, so here is kind of interesting. So you have some data, then on top of that data, right, you build a view, which is already a view on an object, is one meta level up. Then in that view, you have another meta level, because now you're showing, in that view, you're showing some code that is applicable on this little object, right? So you're now two levels of meta, and you just stitch them together like this, very naturally, right?
Yeah.
And you can still make sense of it. And that's the crazy thing, right? And you're just doing it on you're just connecting some arbitrary, some arbitrary objects, basically. And we find doing this all the time. That's the essence of every interrogation we have about our systems. Many times, or most really interesting problems are, you have to go several levels, navigate multiple levels of meta, or at least of interaction. And you just never know where the problem is. You never know what the interesting solution is. So that's why it's just the fact that you do not have a fixed amount, like what's the space in which you need to reason, right? And how many levels. Because if you look at any interface, like if you take one of these fit activity apps, right, they will give you a finite amount of things. Maybe you can edit some charts if you're really, really lucky, but that's it. You're stuck. That's it. There's nothing else,
no.
Right? So if you want to say, I don't know, give me all the time, every time I went there and the weather was nice, was it better for me? Right. Then all of a sudden, I don't know. Or when I went to somebody, and this information is somewhere here, was it better, right? Was I don't know, did I feel better, or I don't know, like any of these.
Well, how about how much sleep I got the night before? Was I able to work out harder, or was I more fatigued?
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah. And so, and those kinds of questions are hard. Like, are not straightforward. And it's impossible to imagine all the possible connections that people will make, would make, or would be even be interested in making. And so, and that's why like our goal was to say, how do we build an interface that would allow us, even in the super primitive, this is not the most expressive interface possible. But the balance, the balance that we wanted to strike here was, how do we get enough that is interesting enough that we can, but is also, let's say, reasonably easy to, like I don't have 1,000 operators, that I just have a few of them. Like an inspector doesn't have many operators. It basically has about 5. So you just have all the other things that are programmable, like the content of a view in itself becomes then an operator, but you have a basic library with which you can build these other ones, and then it explodes from there, of course. And this is why we're saying that we started from this idea of apps being decomposed, or apps being described in terms of features. If we would to measure the amount of features that the environment, for example, the one you built now, that you have. So if you take all the Glamorous Toolkit plus all of these and measure the amounts of features that you have, and let's say that you would recognize a feature by either some button or some view that you get, some combination of view that you have that you're able to put on the screen, you might be able to get into millions, just because you can just combine like
Combination.
any the amount of combinations just of panes, right? Just of stitching together 2 different objects, right? Like you're doing here. I have a file locator, which is nothing interesting about it, and then an FP feed activity, and then next afterwards I have a chart. I stitch those together, and they have meaning now. And even if I'm just doing basic things, like I don't have to do a lot. Now when I start to add the views on top, so I have like we easily can go into the territory of millions of reachable, basically reachable states, reachable possible states, and it's still manageable. So one of the questions, for example, newcomers ask when they hear about this idea that you have all these many views and you can have, but how do you manage that? Isn't it overwhelming? So how do you manage that? Isn't this overwhelming that you have so many views?
The system is, I would say it's self-scoping. So yeah, there are, I don't know how many views there are, but when I'm looking at file locator, there's the normal ones for a file, which I've seen a million times, so I'm already familiar with them. And then there's just kind of one extra. So I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So in this moment, when I'm dealing in this inspector, as far as I'm concerned, there's 7 views in the entire system. So, yeah, you know, it's irrelevant.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And in fact, it's the opposite, right? And we are actually, so we go so far as to, we basically say every time we have a question, we just say you hit something and you see, wow, 5 views right there. Oh, this means this thing here was threaded multiple times, right? This path here, like there were multiple people coming here for multiple different interests, because every view kind of encapsulates at least one interest, right? Ideally, not many more than one interest. Just you should, like, it's great when views are really small, but sometimes you have larger views. But then you dive into it, and maybe the answer is not here. So you dive a step forward, and then you say, oh, look, we've reached some territory, like there's just nothing. It's like your FP feed activities. There's just, you know, it's like virgin territory. Like there's like nothing, nobody's been here, or maybe if they've been here, they've just been here once or something, or I don't know. So it's like, you feel like, oh, now we need to just calm down, build a little, you know, bring some lights here, you know, cut the trees and then build something there. Oh, now we start to settle. Now we start to feel cozy. Now we go a step forward. So there's a certain reassurance that comes once when we see views, right? So it's kind of the exact opposite that people have when they hear about this idea of many views. It's it's like say, "Ooh, but this sounds like dangerous or it sounds scary," or while we feel it's the opposite, right? So if I don't have views, then I like, "Oh, I'm uncertain now here. I don't know what happens here. Let's build some views to make me feel safer."
And I can't think of a single object that I've run into so far where I needed to create more than a handful of views where it got, awkward, because at the point where I need to create that many views, I probably need to create another object.
Yeah, it's likely. Yeah, there are some, but not many. Yeah, that's clear. Very nice.
So let's see. I think that was this is not too exciting, but I ended up releasing all my stuff MIT, almost all of my projects MIT. And I really didn't want to do that because I am deeply uncomfortable with the idea of corporate behemoths taking anybody's labor for free. However, I after some conversations with you and what you guys were thinking about the Think stuff and doing extensive research online, it seems like a better alternative is not quite there. There's like these far copyleft and cooperative licenses, but they're not tested. Nobody knows how to use them. Everybody's afraid of them. So I said, just in the interest of, practicality, I'm just going to give it away MIT, but I'm going to have a disclaimer. I'm going to whine about it a little bit in every project. So I have, some disclaimers and boilerplate that in every project. In the README about MIT, it is MIT, but I just want you to know this is why I did it. And I don't, if you use it and you plan on making money, I would appreciate you, recognizing the work that went into it. So now what this is though, is that on the right here, this is actually just using, so now I think it's easier to come at it through here. So this is, let me think about how to do this. Project registry. All right, so. All right, so this is like kind of my own personal Squeak map type of thing. If you remember Squeak map back in the day. So these are all of the GT firewall related projects that I'm interested in, whether they're mine or somebody else's. And it's just a little model. You can add them, and then when you dig into them, we'll just pick one that's public. All right, we'll take Dynabook, which is what we're looking at. And so it just has, it has the repository. So, it's a GitHub repository, and you can have the default branch and the code subfolder and all that stuff, whether it has project metadata, because then when you want your, in your Metacello baseline URLs, if it has project metadata, you don't have to put the / code subfolder. Whereas if you, otherwise you need it. If it's
what
upstream,
happens if you click on SRC?
It gives you all I just put the common ones that people use. This is very big. I actually I very rarely edit anything from here because I'm always using project metadata. So it's always created somewhere else. But I can let it know whether it's upstream, and that just, it figures out when I'm committing stuff, when I'm doing PRs and stuff, whether there's, I have my own repo. It'll clone it from my username, but it will, it will preserve where it actually lives, the canonical repo. So in these projects, if I go back to where we were before, we're just looking at here, there's this README. And what the README does is it actually takes some of that metadata that we were just looking at. And there was one other thing that I didn't show, which was the load script. So this is a GT load script, and if you Pharo, you can remove the fork, so it has all these different options, but this is the particular one. For this one, you can run it through the inspector. And so what this does is it generates my README, and under the installation, it actually puts the load script from the active project. So and it puts my legal disclaimers at the end that I was talking about. So it's just, I'm gonna write the thing once and want it in every repo. And I'll be damned if I'm going to sit there and copy it 100 times or write some kind
Nice.
of bash script. So this is just, it's just like little things that you create a workflow once, you model it in GT, and then you never think about it again. Like I don't even probably remember how this all works here. Like if I, oh, and of
Nice.
course the disclaimer, of course, is a Lepitor page.
Right.
So where's
But
the?
you've done something with the Lepitor page, because it should have a live view.
Yeah, I was just noting that noticing the live view is absent. I wonder what I did to it. Oh well, we'll figure it out later.
So just before we maybe go forward. So here can you go back to your small project object in the third tab?
Yeah, okay, here we go.
Right.
Yep.
So let's do go to meta in the small project, and we have to add the load script view there.
Okay.
It's like we cannot go forward like that. So
hold on.
just create one.
Oops.
We-
Here. Just being lazy. Okay.
This is not bad. You're gonna want right load script.
Okay, actually, this is not a great one to pull. I'll just write it. This is like uber lazy.
Right. So we just have to create a view text editor.
Oh, you want text editor?
Yeah.
Is text the
Text, exactly. It's gonna be your. It's gonna be a block. I think your print string is gonna be the.
Oh man, do it.
Much better. So let's make it let's make it at least the code, just to use the code.
Yeah, I'm not
Code
sure. I
font.
never did a code one.
So yeah, you can do. Let's actually go and well, basically you want to use an aptitude here in the text editor. You can tell it to use an aptitude.
And that's right on the view. I cannot do that.
Exactly, at the level of the view. So aptitude is for elements, but this view also knows how to.
Should we do a query GTView pragma with that calls aptitude? Would that be or text editor or both?
Yeah. GT references, capital R. And then you can look for styler or aptitude. Yeah, the first one probably is a good one. So you see there you have an aptitude and you have a styler.
Yeah, okay.
So that's nice, right? You were in the third tab. Here, the third tab.
There we are. Any idea?
And then yeah. So the styler would be something like maybe actually we can take a look at the yeah, you can say BRRB text styler new.
This one here.
Yeah, that's the one.
BRRB text styler new. Okay.
Yeah, this is for workspace, right? So
yeah, should I leave the block?
Yeah,
The other one.
you leave the block. Yeah, it's better.
Okay.
Well, yeah, you can have with or without, but it's nicer with.
Okay.
And there it is.
Okay. Here we are.
And of course, you can add a run button if you want, and then you have a complete thing. But this is already much better, and it's also nice, right? Because you can see a small project. This is a load script of a small project. It's works very nicely. It's so you can it maps nicely. Mhm.
When did I get the
It's also interesting that you do not get the preview of the play. Normally you should have the icon appear. There's an extra semicolon. Ah, yeah, that's fine. Okay.
there we go. Okay, yeah, it was a parsing error. Got it. Okay, cool. Good.
So there it is. Nice. Thank you. I'll sleep much
Sure.
better now.
So it's all I wanted to show. Did you you have more time? Or you on the run? What do you think?
Yeah, we can go a little bit further.
All right. So what I've been dying to know is that you know, because you've been showing this onboarding stuff, it's like, I mean, it's great, but what I'm really interested in is you throw out all these teasers like, oh, it's so great to tweet not from the Twitter interface, and oh, like here's the GT blog that you can read in GT. But I want to see, like, what is it like for you to tweet, you know, using GT if you're doing that, or how do you actually like write the blog, you know, not just consume it?
Yeah, so I'm gonna share the screen. And so this is normal GT, but it has an extra a few extra packages loaded here, and I'm gonna search for, so let's say I want to tweet something. So if I take any page, it can be a note, and I press this, I can get a tweet. And then I can start tweeting. And so this is a tweet, and I can actually tweet from here. If I want to, because
is this in the base GT, or is this something that's in your personal?
This is not in the base GT, and the reason it's not yet in the base GT is because this one requires, in order for this to work, Twitter requires that there is a relay server in between. So this one doesn't talk directly to that one. There is another server in between for which you need authentication, and that one is not yet. We're using it, but it's not yet at the place where we want it to be. And you can see that here it has, there is an extra, there's an extra icon that you get when you're logged in, and this is how we're gonna this is how we can publish blog posts from here. So we can take any Lepeter page and we publish it as a blog post. But then it becomes more interesting is something like this. So this is a page here which basically looks for all the pages that have at least one Twitter snippet that is not yet posted. So you can think of it as like, these are tweets that I started, but I didn't finish yet.
Your drafts.
Basically drafts, right? And sometimes these are like, this is one where it's a longer thread. So that was started 55 days ago. And then, you know, something like 42 days ago, I tweeted something else. And then 17 days ago, I tweeted something else. And I still have others that are in drafts, right? I can see this is a new tweet. This is already tweeted.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so, yeah, so like that, it's, this is how these are basically pretty much all threads that I can keep track of as I want to. And there's another script over here, which will give me all the tweeted things, so all the tweeted threads. So I can see here, there are 53 of them. Right here. And that's basically, that's it. That's it. That's the
cool.
And the for the way a Twitter thread is handled is simply, we're just mapping it in this case on the tree of Lepiter. So the second tweet is a child of the first one, and then the third one is just underneath it. And so this is how we know that this is a single thread here. And that's other than that, it's just everything is the same. So
All right. And when you publish to the blog, does it just do like an HTML converts the Lepiter page into HTML or?
right. So what happens is so let's actually go and find this text snippet. I'm gonna dive in here. Yeah, this one. So here's an example of a page. There's a database over here, and there's a page here, and then I'm going to translate it into HTML. So doing this creates the HTML code. And then on top of it, it also knows how to take snippets and create pictures from there, and then put them all in a single bucket, which is called xdoc. So this executable document, which is nothing but a container with metadata inside, and that's what gets pushed to the server basically. So the HTML is actually created on the client side because we wanted to have a local first. So basically, the place you publish is just something public, but it doesn't know, right? You might want to have stuff that relates to your own environment, so it doesn't necessarily know in which state you want to publish it. It's not the same idea as having a publicly editable page. So at least in our case, because we wanted to focus on having something that works first on my local machine and then afterwards is being published from it.
So on the blog server, there's the xdocs, and then it knows how to dig out the HTML or something.
Right. So in the xdoc, there is an xdoc can have content, and it can there can be multiple. Actually, I'm not sure. Let's see if I find something quickly. Find publish xdoc. That sounds like an interesting thing. There can be multiple pieces of content inside an xdoc. Some of them are I don't exactly know where I should look at. I forgot. I think it's Lepiter. Here it's xdoc. But that's not the one. That is the interesting one. Here it starts to become interesting. So you have this XD writer, which is part of the core Lepiter. Then you can have here some of the examples. And so what we're gonna see here, I think, right, so this is just one component, but basically if you're gonna look at this, I don't see a nice one. Writer with larger. Yeah, this is one. So basically here we have a writer that created this piece. This is one of the pieces of content that will go into the zip, into the archive. And then you can have multiple of these ones in a single zip file. And that's basically what the xdoc is. Xdoc is just a zip file plus metadata, and it will know in there will be an HTML, and then there will be a the initial content of the um, of of the page in this case. So the Lepeter page, and basically you will be able to download this one and then import it into your own database. Should you
Oh, I
choose
see.
to.
But
So
in the context of the blog, which is just kind of like statically consumed, what's the advantage of putting the xdoc instead of just the static HTML, for example?
No, so the xdoc is a container which says there are multiple things in here. And in this case, in the case of a blog post, for example, it will have two pieces of content, the original Lepeter page. So actually it will have like a mini database inside with just a single page, and the HTML preview. And the blog will know, oh, I'm just going to take the HTML previews out of it, and that's what I'm going to show. But then you will be able to download your, if you want to play with it yourself locally, then you'll be able to download it locally.
Ah, okay. So the HTML of the blog takes the HTML inside the xdoc, but then injects like a download the xdoc button kind of
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Right.
Gotcha.
So that's there behind the scenes, it's just not exposed yet.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
But so we're still playing. So right now, every blog post is a database. It's also possible that we'll eventually come to the conclusion that it's more interesting to have the blog itself to be a database. So the idea there is, for example, if you want to publish a mini book, then should that be, then you want the page, a URL to be self-contained, basically. But so that's still something we're playing with, basically.
All right.
But again, like the key here was that we wanted to communicate more with, just wanted to play with threads, and we want to be able to write without thinking about the tool that I should choose first before doing something. So if I feel like writing something, I'm just gonna go to the default place, start typing, and then I'm gonna figure out what I'm gonna do with it. I don't want to do it the other way around. I don't want to think first, oh, this thought belongs in that tool. I'm gonna go in that tool and then I'll put there. Because again, like if this is to work, then these types of flows have to be possible. It doesn't mean necessarily that Glamorous Toolkit is the ultimate interface, because it's clearly not. But the fact that we can push it so far just with the kinds of things that exist already, or just with the kinds of things that are only interesting or mainly interesting for development purposes. It's a development environment first, or this is how it grew. Just the fact that we could do it and push it towards knowledge management or communicating with others, it's already kind of it was a nice surprise that we could do so much with it, basically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, that the entry might not be the most polished of any Twitter tool, but the thing that, again, is the fact that that is now a Lepeter object that is part of my knowledge management. Because what I think, and I was reading about green notes, I think, evergreen notes, something like that. And the author was saying that you do some of your best thinking sometimes in a social media post, because somebody asks a question, and then that's gone. You don't, it's out on, was it on Twitter? Was it on Discord? Was it on Facebook? Where was it? But now it's in Lepeter with everything else. So it's linked. Can you, in a tweet, can you reference a page and it'll have the markdown disappear when you tweet it? Like, could you reference another Lepeter page from a tweet?
No, not from a tweet necessarily, but I can add another text snippet anywhere in there.
Oh, okay. So you can intermix tweets and text snippets.
Intermix any.
Oh, yeah. Okay. It's just another snippet.
It's just another snippet. Yeah.
Ah,
exactly. So there's nothing special about it. That's the nice thing about it, right? And the other thing here that we played with quite for a long time, and we still don't have in Block, right, the graphical framework. We do not yet have the notion of a modal dialogue. We haven't implemented one. So the whole environment exists with no absolute modality, basically, right? Which was one of the initial goals, right? And then the question was, so how do you then conceive of this without modality? And then it turns out that, you know, if you do not have global functions, or if you do not have functions that are, or actions that you can apply at the larger scope than what you're seeing, most often you do not need it. And so if we, by just basically we bring all the actions down to the little pieces, and then this is how we piece together an experience. And then that's the reason why we have so much flexibility, because the frame doesn't assume anything. And so when the frame doesn't assume anything, then you can do, yeah, your reason, there's a lot of freedom afterwards to play with it. So now, so one thing that is maybe less visible is that there in, I'm not sure, I would actually be curious to learn more about this, is the fact that you can have all these many different languages intertwined in your knowledge base. So there is no single representation of knowledge in your knowledge base. And so let me I'm going to share the screen again. So, right, this is a worldly map, and this is a full snippet, right? So just this is a snippet, and this is a full snippet. And here, some of these, right? So you say, okay, so that's okay. We can see this is a first level type of thing. We have one, and then I have another snippet, which just allows me to enter something else. The question here is, well, this is obviously knowledge here, right? There's some encoding of knowledge. So can I now link from some of this to something else, right? Which is related to the kind of question that you were having. Can I link the tweet to something else? So here, for example, a decision will have the possibility to link to a node. And if I go to that node, right? So this is a software assessment. I'm going to see that it actually comes from here. So Lepiter doesn't know about Worldly Map. Worldly Map is just a plugin, basically. But it's still, there's still like it still understands that it comes from there. And the UI understands that it comes from there.
This couldn't be any more perfect, because in the transcript snippet that I showed with Brett Victor's talk, because Brett Victor can also have a page in the, like a Lepiter page associated, because I've been extending Lepiter to have pages associated with arbitrary objects beyond just transcriptable things. So what I wanted to do was have the fact that Brett Victor is the speaker of a line in the transcript on that page show up in the explicit links of the Brett Victor page.
Yeah.
Which sounds like I should look at the Worldly Map snippet to see what it's doing, because it'll be
exactly helpful. So this is that's the reason we built this one. Like, you know, like we're building, because we're building a language, the way you reason about, there are at least two dimensions by which you can look at the language. One is expressivity, the other one is conciseness. So conciseness is how short or how little energy can you spend to do what you want, and the other one is how many things of the things you want to do you can do with you can express with your language. And so the reason we built this one was simply to validate. This was one of the cases where we said, okay, not only do we want other textual snippets, but we want to have arbitrary languages there that might not even be textual. And that's the reason why you're having this. This is a validation for the model of Lepiter, basically, that it is a reasonably generic form of capturing things. The other thing here is to, I'm just gonna copy here let's see, I'm gonna copy a tweet. And I'm gonna open a note and I'm gonna say, I'm gonna paste this. So because I'm logged in, I can paste, which is something you can do now directly in GT, so in the default one. But if you can press here on the details, right, then we can start to say, well, I want to see the conversation. What you're seeing here is this is the conversation, and it just gets populated. But this is a large conversation, apparently, and you get the little icons for the people that are part of this, and it's just paged. So
oh, this is awesome. Then of course it's not locking up the UI, right? It's still active. Oh
no,
my gosh.
It's not. So you can do these kinds of things, right? And this again, like, what is this? This is just a tweet with a view. This is a fancy view, of course. This is not a necessarily a trivial view, but that's pretty much it, right? That's the so now it starts to find the root, and it just takes a while to get all the data from Twitter. So anyway,
sure.
That's another thing. And then again, like for many of these, you can actually go and say reply, and I can start writing a tweet here. I'm gonna reply to that one. So the reason I wanted to do this is I wanted to, for example, ensure that for my threads, I'm replying to all. If somebody wants to contribute something to my thread, I'm going to reply to that one. So I'm going to look for my icon in that thread. In this case, this is not my it's not my thread, but yeah, it's these are the kinds of things that we could you know, put together in something that is supposed to be a development environment. The other thing that maybe is less obvious is, and I think it's reasonably interesting. So let's say I'm going to open another playground here, and I'm going to take a piece of text and say, this is a reference to a class. And I'm going to do a GT class here, and I'm going to say object, for example, right? And now I have a reference to object here. So I'm going to take this snippet, and I'm going to say the parser, let's parse this, right? Just that. So if I parse this, I get, of course, the abstract syntax tree. But what's interesting here is that this annotation here is actually this is a plugin. So not only snippets have plugins, but also the references. So also the annotations are plugged in, but still you have the same idea that we have for the rendering, which is you still have a single tree. So even though this is a different parser, from the perspective of the tool, you have exactly one tree. And that's the reason why here, right, you have completion. And the completion is this, right? So if I say this is a reference to a method, I could say, so now I can say, okay, object, right? So I get one level of completion, but now I have completion in, so the plugin, this is the first level, and now in there, I'm gonna now have completion for the context. This is like 2 levels of completions deep. Right, so here I'm only gonna say print on, for example, right? And I'm going to print this one. And they are all part of the same. And because they're in the same tree, we can use the same tools and we can have a seamless integration, right? So in the text annotation here, like we can also imagine to have a rich text snippet, right? That they don't have to all be markdown snippets, for example, right? We just started with this one because we wanted to find how do we create a completely seamless, extensible language, basically. But so we have this, every snippet is extensible. You can have, every snippet can come with its own language. Those languages don't have to even be textual like we have here. And inside, if you have a textual, for example, a textual language, you can also make it such that it behaves, even if it has plugins, the language, it still behaves as if it's a single unitary language and is supported by a uniform set of tools. Right. And so the last one was, right, so in the to-do, talk, the to-do annotation. So here you have this, right? It shows us, I can click on this, and as I click on it, it will add completed here, right? With this. But the interesting thing is that I actually can get the completion. So now even completion is not hard-coded. It's not just a list. So we can have arbitrary completion too. So the level of moldability, right? It's way deeper than meets the eye, right? And we are applying the same thing for editing now. Things that you know, lots of the conversations about GT started from reading, right? And that's because we think that people are not reading properly code, and then we should talk about it differently. But then it's also, we also wanted to break the editor down, right? And that's the reason, like the reason we built this whole block thing was just so that we can do this, just so that we can embed arbitrary things inside the text that we're, right? So we can break the editor, the editing experience. And what you're seeing here is, right, Glamorous Toolkit is a language workbench, and it's a rather extensive one. It's just not so visible, but it already is that. So you're seeing it used for modeling, knowledge management, but similar things you can do for you know, for other programming languages, for example.
Yeah, when I saw the to-do annotation, I knew it was time for me to start writing custom annotations. You know, I mean,
yes,
that level of flexibility just made a whole world of things possible. Because you know, what I wanted to do was refer to a person and then have the spotter on the address book appear so you could, you know, complete it that way. And
exactly.
So when I saw this, I was like, okay, we're ready to roll now.
Yes, no, that's the idea, right? And this was the exercise. But pretty much most of the things we are doing, right, it's, of course, people that come first to it, right, they will just use what exists and then click through it and just take the list. But the difficulty we're having is that basically everything we're showing are just examples of the space that we want to cover. So the way you validate expressivity of a language is by saying, well, if this is the space, these are the dimensions, then I need to sample the space enough so that I can cover all those dimensions, and you know, validate whatever the thesis is. So in our case, the fact that we can do all of this with under the same umbrella, basically. So there's that part of the environment, which is the fact that it's also a teaching tool, although we don't yet know how to teach what it is that we're doing.
Yes, well, Yes. It's, well, I mean, it's a typical blue plane problem, right? I mean, it's get somebody to think outside the world of what they know is possible. You know, the terms, it's, yeah, I mean, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, you know, I guess it's the same thing with all big ideas, you know, like equality or democracy or, you know, anything like that. It's
Yeah.
they're not natural to human beings, you know. You have to reform the listener for them to really get what you're talking about. It's a McLuhan problem.
Right. Right. Now, I'm not sure ours is as large as democracy, but yeah, it's a
But it's
problem.
in the same, you know, it's an idea that is not natural. It's not one of our inherent, you know, tribal proclivities to understand something like that.
Right. If that's the definition of natural, right? Because now, right, when if somebody would take the phone away from people, people will say, well, that's not natural. So, you know,
Right. So you got to pull an Alan Kay and start teaching children that are 5 years old about GT, and then
yes.
it'll just be a new moldability will just be a normal part of their life.
So, right. And that's another interesting, you know, debate, like who should learn this? And it's interesting because, like, of course, there's this idea that yes, computation should be accessible to children, and I very much agree with that. But there was this interesting observation that even though it was, for example, Smalltalk, right, or personal computing was quite extensively tested again or with children, at least to some extent, even Smalltalk systems remained, or I've seen many problems that remained unexplained, or I was not able to get an explanation that was meaningful for me, for my brain. And so then I wondered, well, is it enough? Because there's one of the questions is, oh, why bother with what developers do today? And like normally you shouldn't, and I agree, because those patterns are not particularly relevant, right? Knowing that for example, the way people read code today, that's the way that people understand code today, right? It's most of it is absolutely not interesting because it's wrong. On the other hand, it's still interesting to observe how the preconditions on the environments and the technology that in which people behave like this induced those patterns. So you have to walk back from the patterns and why did it happen? And so that's the reason why we started from this super technical problem. So our goal was just looking at developers, not because we wanted to find what we need to necessarily, that this is the path to, you know, to teach children, but was to find out how far can we go back, and so that we need to branch to some other future. But it doesn't mean that the Glamorous Toolkit is the vehicle with which we went back and explored, but it's not yet the thing that you would like to necessarily give to children. Although I think it has interesting properties, but it also misses interesting properties, like, you know, drawing with it or sticking it into VR, or so like other types of mediums and types of interactions, because it's like we're still, you know, using a screen and a keyboard from a long time ago, and like there are many other affordabilities today that are not integrated in this. So from that perspective, right, there's this kind of tension.
Yeah, well, I that's why I find the space that Conrad and Ofre are in very interesting, and Ralph Barco, where they're dealing with professionals, but not professional coders. So there's a capacity and a sophistication without the baggage all these terrible ideas about what technology should be and do that we've those of us that have been in the programming world have taken on, you know. So they're fresh, but they're fresh, but they're able to, I think, effectively engage rather quickly with a system like this, because they're already using crappy technologies anyway. You know, data scientists have to use something, and what they're using is awful. So it's not as if you're trying to take somebody that get them into coding. They're into coding. You're just like, please don't do that. You're hurting yourself. Try this.
Yes.
So
no, I agree. I agree. This is why I take so much pleasure looking at the kinds of things that you're playing with for your own amusement, because it's so geeky and yet it's so satisfying to observe.
Yes, and while I won't deny that amusement is probably my primary, or curiosity was probably my primary. Make no mistakes about it. It is useful. You know, it is like having, because you know I take copious notes, but having them when I need them is everyone's challenge, right? With notes, and so that problem, I won't say it's a solved problem, but you know, because now that what I didn't show, and now that I saw that thing with the Wardley map, so now the next thing is going to be that, you know, the person's page from the address book is going to have the explicit links of, because the other thing that you'd have transcripts with is a meeting. So then I'll be able to flag all the things that were tagged with follow-up from meetings with this person and show it on their page. So, you know, it's just, that's very exciting. Yes.
Cool. I'm looking forward to that.
So thank you. I will definitely keep you posted. And I think I'm out of time, given the frequent visits from my little friend. I better go see what she's up to.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you around.